Frank Sinatra, a reportagem mais famosa da imprensa americana sobre o cantor. E sem entrevista, o rei da voz estava fanhoso e não queria saber de jornalistas. O repórter decidiu procurar então outros personagens, gente que girava em torno de Frank Sinatra. E com isso, entrou de um jeito diferente no dia a dia do artista. Acabou revelando o mundo do cantor de uma forma que dificilmente conseguiria apenas com a entrevista recusada. Da mesma forma, escreveu sobre outros famosos e anônimos, sobre coisas e manias de pessoas que vivem em Nova York. E seu trabalho virou uma marca do que se chamou de novo jornalismo nos anos 60 nos Estados Unidos. Esse repórter é o jornalista e escritor Talese, mestre da arte literária na imprensa americana e um veterano de língua afiada na crítica ao jornalismo atual. Você vê a entrevista em 30 segundos. Há mais de 50 anos, Talese vive entre o jornalismo e a literatura. Trabalhou em jornais e revistas, escrevendo reportagens como se fossem textos literários e escreveu livros e uma autobiografia como se fizesse reportagens. Sua vida de escritor deu título ao livro que eu trouxe para o Brasil para a Festa Literária de Paraty 2009.
Talese nasceu em Ocean City, Nova Jersey, em 1932 e é formado em jornalismo. Sua história profissional, iniciada como repórter do New York Times na década de 50, caminhou para a vida de escritor, contada na biografia que ele veio lançar na Festa Literária de Paraty de julho de 2009 como um dos principais nomes entre os autores internacionais convidados para o evento. Repórter, com forte veia literária, foi um dos representantes do novo jornalismo que surgiu nos Estados Unidos no início dos anos 60, ao lado de nomes como Norman Mailer, Tom Wolfe e Truman Capote, entre outros. Onde quer que vá, e em Paraty não foi diferente, Talese é sempre convidado a falar sobre o estilo de fazer reportagens, combinando técnicas jornalísticas com recursos literários, uma forma de tratar a realidade através da narrativa da literatura, permitindo assim observar e revelar mais a respeito de personagens e histórias da vida real. Textos e ensaios que Talese produziu nesse novo gênero ganharam espaço maior em revistas, como a Esquire e The New Yorker, e deslancharam a vida de escritor que ele construiu nas décadas seguintes. Em sua história, Talese fala pouco de si mesmo e mal relata sua vida de sucessos. Procura se revelar mais através de seu trabalho e até chama mais atenção para as dificuldades que sempre enfrentou no exercício da profissão. A maior delas, surpresa, era lidar com as palavras. Talese já disse que escrever é como dirigir um caminhão à noite sem farol, perder o caminho e passar uma década em um buraco. A despeito dessa alegada dificuldade, ele escreveu centenas de artigos, crônicas e 11 livros. 4 deles já chegaram ao Brasil. Além da autobiografia recém-lançada, estão editados em português O Reino e o Poder, a história do New York Times, onde ele revela os bastidores de um dos mais importantes jornais do mundo. Fama e Anonimato reúne crônicas sobre o lado oculto de celebridades, de gente desconhecida e de um inusitado perfil de Nova York. Uma cidade de coisas que passam despercebidas. A Mulher do Próximo é o resultado de 9 anos de pesquisa do autor sobre mudança de costumes sexuais nos Estados Unidos nos anos 60 e 70, antes dos tempos da AIDS. Um retrato polêmico da sexualidade e da moral americana feito a partir de personagens e situações reais. Jornalismo ou literatura? É a realidade tratada de forma literária, um jeito de contar melhor uma história. Talese acha que a sobrevivência de jornais e revistas pode estar nisso, histórias boas e bem contadas.
Para entrevistar Talese, nós convidamos a jornalista Regina Echeverria, Carlos Eduardo Lins da Silva, ombudsman do jornal Folha de São Paulo, Humberto Werneck, jornalista e escritor, e Caio Túlio Costa, jornalista e professor de jornalismo na Faculdade Casper Libero e consultor de novas mídias. Paulo Caruso também está presente com suas charges para registrar os momentos da entrevista e a repórter Juliana Barleta apresenta as perguntas encaminhadas com antecedência pelo nosso endereço eletrônico. O Roda Viva é transmitido pela segunda-feira, ou toda segunda-feira, ao vivo pela internet, às 6h30 da tarde, e também pode ser visto na íntegra, sem edição ou cortes, às 10h10 da noite, na TV Cultura. Boa noite, Sr. Talese.
Good evening to you.
O senhor tem sido um crítico frequente do jornalismo que se pratica na internet. E no seu livro, entanto no seu livro Vida de Escritor, o senhor descreve os jornalistas dos anos 50 e 60 como seres efêmeros que invadiam a privacidade de uma maneira que eles certamente não gostariam de ver se fosse com eles mesmos, bajuladores, galanteadores, negociadores lisonjeiros, são todas afirmações do seu livro, e diz que esses jornalistas justificavam que lhes faltava de ética e caráter, dizendo-se guardiães mal remunerados do interesse público. Se o senhor critica o jornalismo de hoje que se faz na internet, ou o que se faz na internet que dizem que é jornalismo, o senhor acha que a situação piorou ainda mais?
I don't know that it has worsened. I do know that when I was a young man in journalism, I took pride in the fact that my colleagues were less likely to lie than were people in other realms of business. More than, I think there'd be less lying in journalism for sure than politics, less lying in journalism than in the military, less lying than in the automobile business or the Wall Street business. In other words, what I'm trying to say is I believe as a young man aspiring into a profession, as I did in the 1950s, that the reward I received was my association with a cadre of characters, people, journalists, from all over the world, not just in my country, the United States, or my city, New York, but I thought I could have an identity with people all over the world in the profession of journalism who would try to be more honest and were more honest than people in other professions. That was the 1950s, and I still believe today, 2009, as I speak to you today, that is still true, that there's more honesty. Granted, we have some people who are irresponsible or who even lie, but when they do lie, we do not, in journalism, cover up. My city of New York and my newspaper, the New York Times, where I began and still affiliate myself, we've had people in recent years who have not been truthful, and as a result, they lost their job, or they might have been susceptible to the lies of government, certainly with regard to the foreign policy of the Bush administration that led to the war in Iraq. We had one reporter of the New York Times who was susceptible to the propaganda of the Bush pro-war element, and she lost her position. So we don't cover up. We do have mistakes, but we do cover up. That's important. That's very important. And I think today that we have many people who are journalists that I'm not sure they meet the standards of journalism. I'm not suggesting, as in Brazil, that you have to go to journalism school, you have to get a license. I don't think you do. But I think what you do have to do is respect the tenets, the philosophy of journalism, which is to really try to be honest. Because without that honesty, the whole civilization, no matter what country we're speaking of, becomes susceptible to the propaganda and to the malfeasance of government, to the corruptors of systems. The journalist has to protect the population from the corruptors who sometimes have power. I don't care if they're dictators or whether they're of the left or the right. That's all I care about. So I think journalism today, as when I was 50 years younger when I started, is a noble profession. That's what I believe. It's a noble profession.
Sr. Talese, o senhor não acha que talvez seja um pouco perigoso fazer generalizações a respeito de profissão e tempos? Por exemplo, nos anos 1960, é sabido que Ben Bradley, que é um herói do jornalismo, e o pessoal do Washington Post, e talvez outros jornalistas, sabiam que o presidente Kennedy estava prestes a lançar a operação da Baía dos Porcos, em Cuba. E deixaram de revelar isso ao público porque havia algum tipo de simpatia pelo presidente. Então, será que já nos anos 60, no início dos anos 60, o jornalismo já não era também suscetível às investidas do poder, como foi com a sua colega do New York Times durante o governo Bush? Será que o jornalismo não é sempre feito por pessoas e, portanto, ocorre em situações especiais e, portanto, há pessoas que mentem, há pessoas que não mentem, há pessoas que são suscetíveis, há pessoas que não são suscetíveis, hoje, como há 40 anos, como há 70 anos, ou o senhor acha que há realmente uma piora na qualidade do jornalismo nos anos recentes?
I don't believe that I can categorically identify a certain period in my lifetime when journalism was responsible or irresponsible. Because I can remember in the period of Dwight Eisenhower, before Kennedy, the American president President Eisenhower lied about the spy planes going over Russia. And until Gary Powers was shot down, and we Americans had to admit, well, we did lie about the spy planes. In the Kennedy period, which you mentioned, yes, the Bay of Pigs was preceded by an awareness within the New York Times operation, for example, that we knew, there were journalists on the New York Times who knew that there was going to be an invasion of the Bay of Pigs. And we know the New York Times did not print that information. Later on, John Kennedy told the publisher of the New York Times, maybe it'd be better if you did. But Kennedy didn't say you can do it before, so he wanted to have it both ways. Kennedy was very clever. Now, let's talk about the present. During the time of World War II, during the time of the Vietnam War, and during, now, the present, as I said, the aftermath of the terrorist attack in the United States. After the September 11, 2001 attack, there was a period when the United States and the whole democratic system and the whole press corps became obedient because the press was fearful of being identified as unpatriotic. This is true of many people in the entertainment business in the United States. We had a commentator on television, for example, named Bill Maher, who had a show called Politically Incorrect. He said something on a television show to the degree that maybe those people who flew those planes into the World Trade Center, we could call them whatever we wanted, the despicable devils of terrorism. Yes, yes, yes. But he said you cannot say they didn't have courage. You can't say they were cowards. When he said that, which seems like an obvious truth, he was all but banned from television. So do we have freedom of the press in the United States? Yes and no. Yes and no. In the situation in which the press tries to operate, particularly if it's a time of peril, a time of national concern, as in the aftermath of 9/11, the press becomes weak. And that aftermath of 9/11 produced the despicable reporting that came out of Washington prior to the American invasion of Iraq. The timidity, the susceptibility, the weakness of the character of the press was never more ably demonstrated in recent years than in the aftermath of 9/11, because the Bush administration turned the press into a bunch of pigeons in which the Pentagon threw these little seeds out of misinformation, and the press gobbled it up like a bunch of pigeons. That was not a very good time for journalism. It's gotten a little better lately, but the whole period of the war, the Iraqi war, was a time when the lack of vigilance and skepticism, the fact that the press would believe the liars in the Pentagon and in the Bush White House saying there were weapons of mass destruction, and it was not true, and no one stood up to the government and said, prove it. So the press should always disassociate itself with a realm of power. But one of the problems of the press is too much of the press is interested in power. Too much of the press is interested in accessibility to the sources who are in power. And this alliance, this relationship, is like a very bad match, a very bad marriage, because the quest for power leads to destruction of the integrity of the press. So I believe.
Mr. Talese, sobre a sua primeira resposta, o senhor já disse que não faz jornalismo de notícias. E o senhor disse também que aprendeu a não mentir, a não inventar, né? Seria isso a causa do senhor nunca ter se aventurado em literatura de ficção, em jornalismo de ficção, nunca ter escrito ficção? Porque aprendeu a não inventar? Isso fica muito na cabeça.
I once did write a short story of fiction when I was in 1967, but I lost interest immediately because I thought if the reporter, the journalist such as myself, could spend time with people, I would find in people something beyond fiction. Because I believe then, and I believe now, that if you spend enough time with people, even if they're not famous enough to be on this show, or famous enough to get their name in the paper because they're not significant in a public sense, I believe ordinary people have stories that are extraordinary. And what I was motivated as a nonfiction writer was to go into the area of the fiction writer, which is to explore behavior and to explore the interior lives of people who might not have names that you would recognize, the public would recognize. And I thought, here is my mission in life, to be a journalist into the life of ordinary people and to show that there's extraordinary or exceptional or at least something to be written about that other journalists, and certainly historians included, would tend to ignore. So I was trying to write or reflect the history of people in situations where the people would not be worthy of the ordinary historian or the biographer. Do you follow me?
Ok.
Thank you.
Mr. Talese, o seu relato mais famoso, mais conhecido, é sobre Frank Sinatra. O senhor ouviu pela vida afora muitos famosos, muitos anônimos. Se o senhor tivesse que escolher um personagem e uma história, entre tantas que o senhor escreveu, quais seriam?
Well, it would not be Sinatra. Probably the story I like much better than Sinatra, if you ask my opinion. Perhaps it would be the meeting between, the story I observed between Fidel Castro meeting Muhammad Ali. This happened in Havana in 1996. I was asked by a magazine called The Nation, which is a small magazine but a very distinguished magazine published in New York, if I would go with this Muhammad Ali and his entourage, which consisted of about 15 people, on a private plane going from Miami to Havana. They were delivering medical supplies because of the American embargo over Cuba for so long. There was an acute need for medical supplies, and the American government acquiesced to the Muhammad Ali and his group request for entrance into Havana. I was asked by The Nation, would you like to go and write about Muhammad Ali going to Havana because he's going to have a meeting sometime with Fidel Castro. And I thought this was a great story because for the first time in my life, I would be seeing two important people who withstood the pressure of the United States in times of war and peace. Fidel Castro, as you know, for all those years, since 1959, has resisted not only the outrageous boycott and vilification, but has also survived assassination plots to get him killed. We mentioned Bay of Pigs. There's much more than the Bay of Pigs involved here. But this is a man, whether you like him or not, whether you worry about him or not, it's beside the point. He is a man of tremendous character as a personality. I mean, people who can write, maybe it's Gabriel Garcia Marquez will finally write, I don't think he's going to do it. But the great biography of Castro would be one of the great biographies, I think, of our living time. And here is this other person, an American, an African-American, who during the Vietnam War had the courage to stop affiliating himself with the policies of the Pentagon, saying, I'm not going to fight those war against those Viet Cong. Those Viet Cong have nothing to do with me. So this is a courageous and maybe a disrespectful, maybe unpatriotic. Okay, and he was punished. He couldn't fight for 3 or 4 years. I don't know how long. But I thought the meeting of these two outrageous contrarians, one was the contrarian in the world of boxing, but also politics. And the other was this leader of a nation that has been kind of in a situation of turmoil since 1959. And I thought the meeting of these two men would be great. And I did witness the meeting. It wasn't verbal because Muhammad Ali had suffered from Parkinson's disease. I didn't know how bad he was medically when I took the assignment. So I didn't talk to him, just like I didn't talk to Sinatra 25, 30 years before. But it isn't important to talk to people necessarily. I think that the role of journalism doesn't require verbosity. It doesn't require question, answer, question, answer. I think more the observing of people and seeing them in a setting, visual, and sometimes body language. It's very important for journalists to be witness to the people they're talking about, rather on email or all the gadget, the technology that prevails nowadays. The laptop is beating us up with a little view of the world. But that was one of the stories I loved, and I wrote about that, I thought, better than Sinatra.
Mr. Talese, aproveitando essa última parte da sua resposta, digamos que o senhor fosse convidado para escrever um perfil, um livro, e lhe dessem duas opções, ou fazer o perfil do atual presidente do Irã, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, ou um perfil dos fundadores do Google, os dois meninos que fundaram o Google, o Sergey Brin e o Larry Page. Qual dos dois o senhor preferiria? E mais ainda, o senhor usa o Google para fazer pesquisas?
No, I would do Ahmadinejad. I mean, I wouldn't even think about it. Absolutely. I didn't see him when he came to New York a little more than a year ago. He did attend Columbia University, which, like any great university, should be a center of acceptance of philosophies contrary to the prevailing one. It should be a center of open attitude to even the most outrageous speaker from the most despicable country, if you wish. Not that I consider Iran a despicable country. I mean, it should be open to that. The president of Columbia University behaved outrageously, I thought, on that occasion when Ahmadinejad came to just speak. And this president, so beholden to the political opinion, maybe to the lobbyists, it was so despicable. I would write about Ahmadinejad, and I would ask him how he felt about coming to New York and to the bastion of learning that's supposed to be Columbia University, which was almost like a censor. It was almost like the Inquisition of Torquemada. You can't say anything at variance with the prevailing opinion, which is that Iran is the center of devils and they're evil and all this stuff. I don't believe this propaganda, of course, but I would do that Ahmadinejad in a second.
Sr. Talese,
E o Google?
Huh?
O senhor usa o Google para fazer pesquisas?
I don't even know. My wife says I'm lazy, but I don't know that it's laziness. I said before, I don't want to get my information through the technology. I want to take the effort to be there. One time, years ago, if you let me, to 1 second, I wanted to talk to a Chinese woman who was a soccer player. Now I had to go to China and look her up. Now that's a lot of work for a conversation that maybe not be very fruitful, but I think you have to see people, you look at them, I think you have to be there. It's legwork. The old day, when I was a young man, they talked about legwork. Journalists must have legwork. Today, I don't see much legwork in journalism. They sit behind the computer and they will Google this and Google that. They Google the way into a kind of mediocrity, I think, in terms of reporting.
Sr. Talese, nós vamos fazer um rápido intervalo e voltamos um instante com Roda Viva, que é acompanhado por 3 tuiteiros. Essas pessoas colocam na internet seus comentários sobre o programa, ao vivo e permanentemente. São eles Rosana Herman, jornalista, Jane Calegari, jornalista e escritora, e Ana Rush, escritora. A gente volta já já. Voltamos com Roda Viva, que hoje entrevista o jornalista e escritor norte-americano Talese, que dedicou um de seus 11 livros à história dos bastidores do jornal New York Times, onde trabalhou durante 10 anos. O jornal, um dos mais respeitados do mundo, teve sua credibilidade abalada pelo escândalo Jason Blair, o repórter que durante anos escreveu reportagens plagiadas ou mesmo inventadas.
O Reino e o Poder traz a história de 2 famílias que formaram a dinastia do jornalismo impresso nos Estados Unidos, mas é sobretudo um exame crítico das relações de poder e interesse que cruzam os caminhos de repórteres, editores, políticos e empresários. O livro foi escrito em 1969, 20 anos antes do repórter Jason Blair provocar o maior escândalo da imprensa americana ao publicar no New York Times reportagens com textos que eram plágios ou simplesmente invenção. Outros jornais de peso, entre eles o Washington Post e US Today, também publicaram reportagens plagiadas ou inventadas. Comprometeram a informação oferecida ao público e deram uma ideia de como a falta de controle pode atingir empresas jornalísticas quando elas enfrentam dificuldades financeiras.
Sr. Talese, recentemente o jornal Washington Post envolveu-se num episódio não exatamente igual, mas também abalou a sua credibilidade, que foi a reunião, ou a proposta de reunião, de um jantar na casa da editora do jornal, de personalidades do mundo político, do mundo empresarial, em algo que pareceu um pouco estranho para os padrões que eram adotados pelo jornal, que, ao final das contas, foi o responsável pelo caso Watergate. O senhor acha que a sociedade de hoje está, digamos, dissolvendo os limites que deveria haver entre o que é jornalismo e o que é publicidade, e o que é, digamos, relações de negócios dessas grandes corporações de comunicação com aquilo que deveria ser a prestação de informação?
There should be, and most often there is, a separation between the world of journalism and the world that journalism covers, whether it's political, whether it's social, whether it's academic, whether it's athletic, whether it's whatever. I think that journalism should be a kind of a clergy, a mundane clergy, a kind of separate group that should have both a intelligence about what's going on in the larger world, but an isolation from the events and the influences of the outer world. I think we should exist as an international society, no matter what kind. The journalists should be almost like a cult or a international association of truth seekers. Truth seekers. Now, I know it's very hard to define truth, because one person's truth is not another person's truth. So I'm aware of the ambiguity of the very term, truth-seeking. But insofar as humanly able, I think the journalist should stand apart and above the influences that are promoted by the lobbyists, the spin artists, the propagandists, and sometimes the right-thinking attitude of people who have a strong sense of what the truth is. It's difficult. It's difficult.
Mr. Talese, mas a vida real do jornalista não é assim, né? Ele está permanentemente dentro desses conflitos, dentro dessas controvérsias, dentro desses interesses. Dentro disso, e como o senhor se debruçou tanto sobre a vida do New York Times, eu tenho uma pergunta importante, que é para a gente entender. O senhor acha que quais os prós e os contras ao fato de que a família dirige o jornal? A gente está sentindo que os grupos familiares estão cada vez mais se afastando da direção das empresas, mas vários ainda continuam dirigindo o jornal. Apesar de toda a crise do New York Times, a família ainda controla o jornal. Aqui no Brasil nós temos várias empresas de comunicação controladas por famílias. No seu entender, e pegando um pouco da sua resposta, que tenta colocar o jornalismo num lugar sagrado, para usar a sua palavra, quais os prós e os contras para grupos familiares dirigirem empresas de comunicação?
Well, in the New York Times family, we have 5 generations that have run the paper, all one family. The first person who started to make the New York Times a great paper was a man who died in 1935. His name was Adolf Ochs. He was from German heritage, German Jewish heritage. And he came to his family, came from Bavaria and settled in the American South. And this man, Adolf Ochs, started little newspapers. Finally, he took over the New York Times, which was published before he took it over. And he made it into a great newspaper. How did he do that? He found a way to make good journalism pay. He found a way to make a business of producing journalism that was honorable, that was fair, and that was accurate. Accurate. That's the most important, is accurate. And also fair, meaning you get different points of view. He made it pay. He made money. What did he have? What was the money? He was selling integrity. He was selling honesty. He was selling truth. There's a big business in truth. You can make money by being truthful. People want the truth, and he was a purveyor. He didn't have a son, but he had a daughter, and the daughter got married, and the man she married became the number 2 man, and the child they had became the number 3 man, and the child that had was number 4. And then there's 5. There's this man now, this present publisher, whose name is Arthur Ochs Sulzberger. Sulzberger was the name of the man the woman who married Ochses. This man has had a more difficult time than the 4 people who preceded him, family members preceded him. Why? The technology has now taken some of the money away that Ochs, the first man, was able to bring to the business of running a good newspaper. It's a business now, but what he did was make the business of journalism pay profitably. So we could send reporters to Brazil, to Russia, to all over the world, to cover the world as best human beings can do it. The threats of this present New York Times publisher are partly the problem of the world itself and the print media, and maybe the problem that mistakes were made by this particular man and his close advisors. The jury is still out on the New York Times, and the jury is still out on the man I'm talking about, whose name, as I said, Sulzberger, the fifth member of the family. Go ahead.
O senhor acabou de dizer que o modelo de negócios do jornal, impresso principalmente, está em perigo. O senhor acha que esse é um dos motivos por que coisas como a do Washington Post aconteceram? Na minha opinião, isso não chega a ser uma grande novidade, esse tipo de encontros. O que é novidade é esse tipo de encontro estar sendo promovido de uma forma tão ostensiva e de uma forma tão abjeta, quer dizer, você vendendo ingressos de 25 mil a 250 mil dólares para lobistas poderem se encontrar com jornalistas, políticos e membros do governo. Eu acho que esse tipo de coisa já aconteceu no passado, deve ter acontecido, acontece em qualquer lugar. A pergunta é, o senhor acha que é o problema do modelo de negócios de jornalismo que está levando alguns jornais a se comportarem de uma maneira tão condenável?
I agree with you. It's reprehensible, the story involving the Washington Post now, well, not the New York Times. You took the Washington Post. I'm sure most of the audience knows that. But what is the problem? The problem is that the press too often is enamored with power. I said that before. And power is mostly in Washington, because that's the center of power in the United States, Washington. Were I the owner of the New York Times, if not Sulzberger, if I was to take over like some wonderful benign dictator and take over the paper, first thing I would do, I'd break up the Washington Bureau. The Washington Bureau of the New York Times is 60, 70 reporters. I would kick them out of Washington and distribute them around the United States to all the capitals. We have 50 capitals of the 50 states of the United States.
Quantos ficariam em Washington?
Excuse me?
Quantos ficariam em Washington?
Maybe 20, 15. I'd get the other 60 or 50 out. And that would also make this idea of the collective journalistic alliance with the power of the Washington federal government. It would mean that the federal government would have to adapt. They couldn't leak so much news. They couldn't, and you'd break up the unhappy marriage between the media and the power brokers in Washington. And poor President Barack Obama was going to get rid of the lobbyists. He hasn't gotten rid of the lobbyists. They're still there. The special interest groups are still there. They're like fleas. They get into your skin. You can't get out of them. You can't get away from them. But breaking up the press and all the alliances of the press. I'm telling you, the press is partly responsible too. Don't think they're blameless. They like power. They have their parties. They, like you mentioned, the alliances. Their daughters and sons go to the same schools as the daughters and sons of the Senate and other powerful people. They go to the same cocktail parties, the dinner parties, the same vacation places. They go to the same schools. One thing that's happened in my lifetime, I'm 77 and I'm from the old school. When I first entered journalism in the 1950s, 1955, 1956, we of the press were mostly of the underclass. We were the underclass. We were not the elite class or the well-educated class. In fact, journalism, we were not so well-educated as the people we wrote about when I was a young man. Even on the New York Times, this was true. We were skeptical. Our mothers and fathers, most of us hadn't gone to college. We might have been the first generation that went to college. We were the people who made the journalistic class. We were class, the social class. And we were looking at people who went to Harvard, Yale, Princeton, who had luxurious or maybe at least privileged background. And we were looking with a certain skepticism. Now, in 2000, this current group of journalists who are 25 or 35 or 40 years old, which I once was, but that was 40 years ago. This group went to Harvard, Yale, Princeton with what would be the Secretary of the Defense, the Secretary of the Treasury, the President of the United States, Harvard, Yale. They're all going to the elite schools, but so did the journalists graduate from such schools. And the attitude we used to have of being outside, we were outsiders looking in the window. We were people from a distance regarding with a certain skepticism, maybe a certain envy, I'm not so sure, but we were of a different class. Now we have gotten a whole harmonious class of people who are both the reporters and the people who are making the laws or who are in official positions, sometimes elected, sometimes appointed. But there's been an ambiguity, a kind of confusion between the classes. It's all one class. Maybe you say that's wonderful democracy. I'm not so sure. I liked it when we were outsiders. And I think the reference you made to this group of people in Washington, the Washington Post, the New York Times, etc., I think that they should be removed. I think there should be separation, social as well as professional separation.
Nós sabemos que no exercício da profissão o jornalista muitas vezes encontra armadilhas, encontra seduções. Eu não me refiro apenas à vantagem material que se possa oferecer a um jornalista para que ele seja menos fiel ao que ele deveria ser. Me refiro também à simpatia, manobras de simpatia e de sedução que podem envolver um jornalista e afastá-lo do bom caminho. Eu queria perguntar se na sua vida de jornalista já aconteceu alguma coisa dessa natureza e de que maneira o senhor se safou da situação.
Só para completar, a minha pergunta era se o senhor acredita que um jornalista pode realmente ser imparcial.
Do I believe a journalist can really be unbiased? And did I have an experience where I was susceptible to a kind of pressure or a kind of attraction? So they're related. I believe that the role of the editor over the reporter is supposed to be watching for signs of, if not bias, inclination. For example, in the coverage of the Iraq War, we had a reporter in the Washington Bureau of the New York Times whose sources included someone who was Iraqi, who had had a personal relationship, I don't mean sexual, I mean a friendship, an acquaintanceship with the reporter. You know, let's not kid ourselves. Her name is Judy Miller. Why am I being so secretive? We all know Judy Miller. And she had this very pro-Bush, pro-activist personality with regard to attacking Iraq. The war was necessary. Weapons of mass destruction were probably there, as was alleged by people in the Bush administration. And that it was good for Israel, because she was very, very she was very neocon, affiliated with the Israeli lobby in her spirit, not officially, but in her attitude. And so she was fomenting the war and publishing information that she was spoon-fed by people who were part of the pro-war movement within Washington. She was doing this, and she wrote many stories around the front page. It wasn't one story, it was a series of stories. Before the management of the paper, after she went to jail for a while, because she wouldn't reveal her sources. At first it was a noble thing to do, and the press went along with it. But later on, people caught on, and there was some criticism within the press. In fact, within the whole New York Times, there was criticism of this colleague who went astray. It's like a person, again, getting back to the ecclesiastical sensibility. It was like a person in a religious order who lost faith in what the teaching was and became a kind of deviant person. She eventually lost her job. Okay? Now, did it happen to me? No. Why? Well, first of all, I don't really want to deal with politics because I think politics is filled with liars. I don't think there's any point of me trying to write so well about such a disreputable group of people. It's so hard to write well. I'd rather write well or try to write well about somebody I respect, and I have very little respect for people in government. I'm not a radical. I'm not a rebel. I'm just a sort of a detached person.
Okay.
Did I answer your question?
Talese, vários internautas querem saber como colocar em prática o tipo de o método de jornalismo que o senhor defende e, ao mesmo tempo, aguentar a pressão dos meios de comunicação.
If you want to know how I work, is walk away from your laptop. The laptop traps you. The laptop makes you solitary. First of all, it makes you sit down. You shouldn't be sitting down. You should be running around and getting outside. You shouldn't be inside. You should not have a roof over your head if a good journalist. Sometimes you have a roof over your head, but sometimes you should be outside. Number two, you shouldn't have a sense of such direction that the laptop or the technology provides. Sometimes with the laptop, you punch questions in that you want to have answered. But by the very fact that you're asking certain questions means that you're cutting yourself off from the larger curiosity that you probably have or should have about questions. I mean, I think you should not be linear, goal-oriented. when you use the laptop, you are indulging in your goal-oriented manifestation. You are asking a certain question, and you want to have and can have with ease, with speed, the answer. But the answer isn't necessarily what you want, because the question should not be so specific. I think the curious person wanders around. It could be the world of politics, the world of culture, the world of whatever. Wander around with a general sense of wanting to know something, but not to be in the initial period so specifically pinned down in a way that prohibits you from discovering things by chance. The word serendipity is, of course, what I'm referring to. And I always followed the attitude of, I want to go out there, I have an interview, like I interviewed Frank Sinatra. Now, the idea was, my editor said, you're going to interview Frank Sinatra. And they sent me out, and then Frank Sinatra didn't want to talk to me. Now, a lot of reporters say, oh, he won't talk to me, the story's over. The story, that's why I'm not goal-oriented. I thought, oh, he won't talk to me, I'll find another story. There's always other stories and other stories and other people that become the story. Other people can become the story. If I was a foreign correspondent, what would I be doing in Afghanistan? You know what I'd be doing? I wouldn't be listening to General. I would be trying to make a relationship with a family, a Taliban family. And what would I want to do? I want to get inside the house of one family and see how they see the world, the Taliban. We hear Taliban, Taliban. If I was in Israel or a country, I would want to know, what is a settlement? Settlement. They would tell you settlement, settlement. We don't even know what a settlement is, because we haven't lived in a settlement. I would live in a settlement and know how is the settlement different from the way the Palestinians live around them. Just localize the story. Tell it through people, not through the president of Israel, the president of Palestinians, whoever, which faction, the Hamas or what. I would take it to the people, who are not usually the people that journalists talk to. Journalists talk to official people. They talk to the designated authority. They talk to the elected person. They talk to the general in charge. Forget them. Talk to the people. Get away from the center of authority and wander around.
Professor Talese, o senhor não acha que justamente esses novos meios tecnológicos, por exemplo, como o Twitter, que permite mandar mensagens ou registrar o que acontece pelo celular, inclusive, ou mesmo câmeras de vídeo que as pessoas podem transportar no bolso, como um telefone celular, justamente permitem às pessoas e aos jornalistas não dependerem mais das grandes máquinas de comunicação?
Can you Twitter the Taliban?
Por que não?
No. You have to go there. I don't... excuse me, I interrupted you.
Não.
What's the question?
A questão é a seguinte, é que há quem defenda a ideia de que no passado, em que nós todos jornalistas aqui atuamos, e até hoje alguns atuam, vinculados a grandes empresas de comunicação, se a pessoa não tivesse esse vínculo, jamais poderia publicar a sua história. Fosse ela acontecida entre os talibãs, ou no Iraque, ou no Irã, ou no Vietnã, ou nos Estados Unidos, ou aqui no Brasil. Hoje, com a internet, qualquer pessoa pode contar a sua história e, eventualmente, pode ser lida por milhares ou milhões de pessoas. Quer dizer, não há mais necessidade de um jornal, de uma revista, ou de um livro. Isso não é um avanço?
Yes, that is an advancement in terms of options. It is an advancement in terms of an alternate view of what you could otherwise not see, because you wouldn't have these citizen journalists, these wandering unprofessionals who have in their hands a camera with a telephone, and they can record, for example, a car in the part of Western China where we're having the Muslim reaction to the autocracy of the Chinese People's Republic of China. Though some of the camera gives pictures that otherwise would not be available to television. I acknowledge that. I acknowledge that, and I'm not exactly so reactionary as I might have seemed before. I do believe, though, that the responsibility of telling the truth still relies on the traditional journalist, because these people who might have a point of view also have, with this technology in their hand, the capacity of propaganda. For example, a bunch of monks from Tibet can have a camera and they show only the Chinese beating up on the Tibetan. It could also be true that the Chinese could show, as they do in this recent story today, of cars, police cars, being turned over by the Muslim element, and maybe we just get little pictures. Sometimes little pictures, precise pictures, are not indicative of the full story. Pictures can lie. Selected pictures, the pictures that are taken, maybe they show action, because in this visual age in which we are, it is almost mandatory to show action. Fires burning, a police car turned upside down smoking, people rioting, people beating up people, and you see it again and again. The same guy getting hit 2 days in a row because they keep repeating the same picture on CNN or whatever it is, or maybe the blogger got this picture that's dramatic. It exaggerates. It's true and true. It's true in one sense, but narrowly true. It gives a little picture. It does not give the big picture, which is what's going on in a block away, or 2 blocks away, 3 blocks away from the guy getting his head beat open by some police officer. You follow me?
Nós vamos fazer mais um intervalo, lembrando que a memória do Roda Viva está disponível em nosso site www.tvcultura.com.br/Roda Viva. Ali você pode pesquisar o conteúdo do nosso arquivo. É bom registrar para o senhor Talese que a íntegra das entrevistas é publicada em formato de texto, o que facilita o entendimento, e também você pode mandar por esse endereço seus e-mails e críticas e sugestões ao programa. Nós voltamos num instante. Voltamos com o Roda Viva, que entrevista hoje o jornalista e escritor norte-americano Talese. Identificado com o jornalismo literário que surgiu nos Estados Unidos nos anos 60, ele tem publicado seus últimos trabalhos em livro. Muitas das reportagens que ele fez nos últimos anos não foram aproveitadas pelos veículos de comunicação que as encomendaram.
Talese, quando trocou o New York Times pela revista Esquire, estava trocando o espaço apertado de um jornal diário pelas páginas espaçosas de uma revista mensal. Mas mesmo assim, as revistas acabaram pequenas e Talese viu nos livros a saída para seu trabalho literário e para suas reportagens recusadas pela imprensa. Uma delas, grande frustração para o autor, foi o perfil da jogadora chinesa que perdeu o pênalti na final da Copa Mundial Feminina de Futebol em 1999, dando vitória às americanas. Ele apostou que a jogadora, responsável pela derrota chinesa, daria uma boa história e foi para a China, com dinheiro próprio, onde ficou 5 meses para fazer a reportagem que nenhum jornal ou revista se interessou depois. Ele conta o episódio em seu livro autobiográfico, bem como de outras reportagens que também precisaram de tempo para serem pesquisadas e escritas, e que, pelo tamanho ou pela demora, não conseguiram espaço em jornais ou revistas.
Senhor Talese, o senhor acha que esta situação, o fato de o senhor ter escrito, digamos, vários trabalhos que não foram publicados e que acabam agora saindo no seu livro Vida de Escritor, é uma indicação de que a grande imprensa já não tem mais espaço para esse tipo de trabalho que o senhor faz e que exige espaço, exige tamanho, exige tempo de produção para pesquisa e para redação e exige dinheiro também? Porque muitas vezes para se fazer uma reportagem, por exemplo, acompanhando a jogadora de futebol que perdeu um pênalti na decisão final do campeonato feminino, não é fácil, não é barato e não se faz via Google, evidentemente. Isso é uma realidade, isso é bom para o jornalismo e como é que, emendando aí, como é que o senhor explica o sucesso dos seus livros, que afinal de contas fazem exatamente isso?
Well, I started off without much money. It's not that I had the influence that I now have because I have had a number of best-selling books. Therefore, I can fly to China in ways at the age of 67, 68, which is 10 years ago, that I couldn't have done when I was 26. You gradually get to a point where you can expand your capacities through the economics as well as through your experience and your perseverance. I still believe that a young person, somebody who's 24, 25, that lives in maybe Sao Paulo or lives in Sacramento, California, or lives in Shanghai, could still do what if they want to, what I do. Because fundamentally, I've done the same thing when I was young as I do as I'm old. Just a couple of days ago, I wrote a newspaper article for the New York Times. I'm a freelancer. I don't write for the paper on a full-time basis, but occasionally I do. So I wrote an article about sightseeing New York, seeing New York from a boat, going around. And I wrote as I would if I was 24. You go to the place, you see what you see, you meet people one-on-one. On that sightseeing boat, I met a woman from China. I met a woman from Germany. I met a woman from Sweden. I met a man from Chicago. The world comes to you if you reach out, and even if you're in a small place, such as on a sightseeing boat, a 60-feet-long boat, you can meet people from all over the world. So the world comes to you. I don't think there's any substitute, even this time of Google and technology of various other kinds, that dominate much of human life, because they become essential tools. They become essential, and they also are given great advantages. I speak to you on a day when my wife told me as we were coming to your studio, she said, oh, it's our daughter's birthday. And she, with my wife's little BlackBerry, she carries it and uses it. I don't, but she does. She said, happy birthday. Here we are in a car taking us from our hotel in Sao Paulo to where we are now. And she says, happy birthday to our daughter in New York. Now, that's great. Now, if I were learning that my daughter's birthday, I actually forgot my daughter's birthday, to tell you the truth, what would I do? Well, I wouldn't say right away, happy birthday. I would wait till 4 hours that your studio is finished. I leave here, I go back, take a taxi cab. I might get on a telephone. So it'd be 4 hours later. Well, that doesn't seem so significant to me, so I don't have instant communication. But at 4 hours later, or maybe I would send her a telegram. You still have telegrams. Maybe not, maybe yes. But so I'm not interested in speed. When I was a journalist, I didn't want scoops. I'm not interested in beating the competition. So many journalists are obsessed with scoops, especially now that television has intruded upon the whole 24-hour network of constant deadlines around the clock. I don't think it's important to be first. I think it's important to be right, to be accurate. And then secondly, and almost as important as first, is to be fully representative of the full truth, not the isolated truth. So I think speed isn't always the desired element in journalism.
Sr. Talese, quando nós sabemos que o senhor não gosta do rótulo novo jornalismo, mas ele existe, todo mundo usa. E, em geral, quando se fala no novo jornalismo, 3 nomes são sempre citados: o seu, Truman Capote e Tom Wolfe. Atribui-se a Capote a frase de que ele não gostaria de ser lembrado como jornalista, mas sim como escritor. Pelo que o senhor expôs aqui, eu acho que o senhor gostaria de ser lembrado como jornalista, mas eu gostaria que o senhor confirmasse isso e também que o senhor dissesse para nós o que o senhor achava, o que o senhor acha do Capote como jornalista e como escritor e do Tom Wolfe como jornalista e como escritor.
I think very highly of Tom Wolfe. He is a wonderful stylist, which doesn't diminish the fact that he is also a very good reporter. Tom Wolfe does a lot of research. Tom Wolfe doesn't write a book every year. He writes a book maybe every 4 or 5 years. Each book, even if it's fiction, it's made up of reporting. He's very good. I admire. Truman Capote was a fine writer, and he ventured into new journalism, and he capitalized on it, and he revived his otherwise merely literary career to more of a celebrated career because he, with his book In Cold Blood, had an enormous impact on the genre of the new journalism, and he should not be embarrassed about being called a journalist, but he's a writer. But so am I a writer. So is Tom Wolfe a writer. We're all writers. Journalists can be writers. The only thing that I had, you mentioned that I took a little bit of resistance to being defined as a new journalist. The reason I did is because so many of the so-called new journalists who got into the popular game of calling themselves a new journalist in the 1960s did not do the legwork. Legwork, I hope we can interpret clearly. It means doing the research, not making it up. The difference between fiction and nonfiction, journalism and novel writing, is that journalism has to be accurate and verifiably accurate. Not just say it's accurate. No, people have to be able to check on you to make sure that you're living up to your assumption that you're a writer of truthful things, that you're a writer of realism. I take pride in being a writer of realism, but a writer of realism. A journalist sometimes we have examples of journalism who they don't do the work, and they bring disgrace upon the whole profession of journalism.
O que precisa? Nós estamos enfrentando no Brasil uma discussão importante agora, porque não é mais necessário você ter um diploma de jornalista para exercer a profissão de jornalista. Mas, a seu ver, qual é a formação necessária para alguém ser um bom jornalista, com a capacidade de bastante acuidade, de escrever coisas que possam ser verificáveis? Qual deve ser a formação dessa pessoa?
Well, there has to be fundamental respect for the basic mandates of journalism. You mentioned some of them. Accuracy. It is not a work of the imagination. It is a work of research. Journalism is motivated by research, and I suggest you have to be there. A lot of journalists are not there. They do it technologically. They do it through the technology, which can be okay and can be also superficial. It can be very limiting, but that's beside the point. Accuracy is number one. What else? In order to be fully accurate, you have to have a pervasive sense of curiosity. It cannot be a curiosity that's narrowly defined. It has to see a big picture, to have an awareness of more than the people you're talking to, awareness of people who are related to the people you're talking to. I don't mean physically and in a familiar sense related, but just you have to have a rather large personality and see things in a large, with scope, with embracing more than just the person that you're personifying in your interview. What my method is to talk to a lot of people and to write about a lot of people. I rarely write about one person. We're getting back to what was the introduction today, Frank Sinatra. I talk to everybody, and they talked about Sinatra through the vantage point of many perspectives, many eyes, many perceptions, many backgrounds, many ages and occupations.
Mas em termos de universidade, quais tipos de cursos podem ajudar alguém a ser um bom jornalista?
Well, nothing will help being a good journalist if you lack the following. If you are not broadly curious, I don't mean just self-centered. If you're self-centered, you shouldn't be a journalist. You should be something else. Be a singer, an actor or something. But you have to be very curious. Then you have to have, number two, you have to be patient. Cannot be fast. I mentioned earlier, scoop should not be the prevailing priority. Very patient with people. Spend a lot of time with people. Interview them and ask the same question 5, 6 times. You get different answers. Sometimes the answers you get to questions are not what people think. So I always am curious about going over again and again and again the same question and get a different answer or a fuller answer, more complete answer. So patience is important. Number 3, I think that the writing has to be exquisite. I think the writer, the journalist writer, should write as well as a novelist, a short story. Sometimes journalism, they think, get the facts. You have to get the facts. Get it right. You have to get it right. True. But then you have to write it. And you have to have a way with words, a way with the language, a method of communication that will make the story interesting without lying. It should be interesting. It should be compelling. Just like if you read a wonderful novelist, first page and the first chapter, it should be compelling. Journalism should be literary. Journalism should be literary. It shouldn't be fiction, of course, I keep saying that, but it should be literary. It can be literary. There are many great writers of fiction who write nonfiction. Some of the Ernest Hemingway, our American hero, started in journalism. I mentioned that Tom Wolfe might write fiction, but he's a journalist at heart. So this is a good thing. Journalism is a noble profession, and you can't teach it. Journalism, you may get a degree in journalism from some outstanding department or school of journalism. It doesn't mean you're any good. You have to be ready in your heart to be a journalist.
É verdade que o senhor sofre muito para escrever, que esse talvez seja, na sua opinião, a parte mais difícil de uma reportagem, a que fica pelo fim, e que o senhor costuma se isolar completamente do mundo para escrever, num bunker, num lugar totalmente fechado? É verdade?
It's true. At the first part is being out there with people, the art of hanging out. I hang out with people. I'm with a lot of people. Then I also, after I've gathered all the research, then I do isolate myself. But while isolating myself, I'm thinking, first of all, what am I going to do with all this material? How will I, as I said before, make it compelling on the page? And that is where you have to think in terms of scenes. You have to think, the reader who picks up the page, picks up the first paragraph, reads the first paragraph, the second paragraph, third paragraph, page 1. Are they going to see all that you saw? Sometimes there are great reporters who collect a lot of information, get it all correct. And then when they write, they don't communicate what they saw and what they felt to the page. It takes time. It takes time. I mentioned you have to take time. You take time with the research, and then when the writing comes, you don't just do it casually. You do it with the same intensity of purpose. And so, as I said, you have to write as well as the fiction writer, and can, I think, even though you're dealing with true things, because true things are wonderful things in our
Mas o senhor sofre com isso?
Yes, sir.
O senhor enumerou assim, os requisitos para que um jornalista possa fazer um bom jornalismo. Todo mundo gostaria de ser gay, Talese. Agora, eu pergunto se, nas condições objetivas do jornalismo diário, em que medida existe espaço para ser tudo isso que o senhor estava dizendo?
It is possible. I'm not saying that it's easy. It is not easy. Anything that you do well is not easily done. It takes time to create something. It could be building a beautiful piece of furniture. It could be designing a beautiful automobile. It could be whatever it is. You have to, a musical instrument, a violin, or playing it well is also taking time to be able to play the violin in an expert fashion. So the idea of doing things easily does not appeal to me. People that want to do something easily should stay away from the art world and the journalism world, I think. It should be hard. It should be hard.
Talese, o internauta Guilherme Neto, de Belém do Pará, ele pergunta o seguinte: que cuidados o jornalista deve ter ao se tornar personagem da reportagem e tentar viver a história na própria pele? Que cuidados ele tem que ter para depois reportar essa experiência?
If it is important to tell the story from a first-person point of view, it could be permissible. I don't have any dictatorial rules that you can't write first-person singular. You have to write it. I do both. When I wrote about Frank Sinatra, I didn't write about me at all. I wrote a whole book about the New York Times. I worked there for all the years. I never mentioned myself at all in the book. I used other characters but I knew the characters well. These individual people that carried my story, I knew them well in the New York Times book. And in the case of the magazine piece, Sinatra, I wrote about other people. But there are also times when I wrote about myself. For example, in the recent book published in Brazil, called A Writer's Life, I write about myself trying to write a story, and the story didn't get published. So I write about my reaction to the editor who didn't publish the story. I made the non-published event into a publishing event. By writing about something that I wanted to publish, it got rejected by the editor, and that wasn't the end of it, though. In my version, the story was just beginning. The whole story was a story that did not become a published story by the terms of the magazine that assigned me the story. And I wrote about what happened to me after the story was rejected. What did I do with it? And the people that I tried to interview for the story initially, when it was a magazine assignment, I stayed in touch with. You know what I do? I never cease my connection to the people I write about, even if the story's published. I think the story is going to go on. I wrote about, one time, the book called Thy Neighbor's Wife, about the sexual revolution in the United States in the 1960s and 70s. The book was published in 1981. I stayed in touch with those people, and I just wrote a new version of it in 2009 when I brought up to date some of the people in 2009 that I'd finished writing in 1980. Do you follow me? The people, if they're still alive, they still have stories to tell, and I go back and revisit my old assignments years and years later. it's a form of journalism that is also inventive.
Senhor Talese, vamos fazer mais um rápido intervalo e voltamos para a entrevista num instante. A gente volta já já. Voltamos com o Roda Viva, que hoje entrevista o jornalista e escritor Talese. Um dos livros que ele publicou que teve maior repercussão foi justamente A Mulher do Próximo, que acabou saindo depois que havia surgido o debate e a polêmica em torno da AIDS.
A Mulher do Próximo fala da revolução sexual nos anos 60 e 70. Tempos de agitação estudantil, de protestos contra a guerra do Vietnã, de explosão feminista e de liberação. Faça amor, não faça guerra. O recado hippie foi além de Woodstock e permeou a sociedade de tal forma que, como Talese lembra no livro, o escritor John Updike chegou a chamar os Estados Unidos de paraíso da carne. A revista Playboy ajudou. Mesmo às escondidas, povoou os sonhos masculinos até mesmo nas pequenas cidades mais puritanas do interior americano. O discurso do amor livre, as aventuras extraconjugais e os escândalos sexuais com espaço cada vez maior na mídia mostraram que muita coisa havia mudado. Para desvendar isso, Talese foi a campo e acabou expondo a privacidade dele e de outros personagens reais em sua crônica da permissividade americana antes da era da AIDS.
Senhor Talese, o senhor publicou esse livro, A Mulher do Próximo, e o próximo livro do senhor é também sobre uma mulher, a mulher do senhor, a sua esposa, há 50 anos. E eu aproveito para juntar essas duas coisas e perguntar o seguinte: é possível ser fiel, ser rigoroso, ser, digamos, veraz, quando a gente fala da gente mesmo, quando fala da mulher da gente?
It is only possible that you try to be truthful insofar as you understand what it is you're writing about. I've been
Mesmo
married
que a
50
mulher não
years.
goste.
Excuse me?
Mesmo que a mulher não goste muito.
Well, let's say my wife, who's been, as you mentioned, for 50 years, I only have had one wife, and now the anniversary is 50 years. She said, my husband wants to write a book about our marriage. He doesn't even understand marriage. What can he know about marriage? Well, maybe that's true. But what I am is also a reporter. As I said before, I'm a reporter. Now, maybe the truth that I write or seek, the truth that I seek, will not be in concert with or in agreement with what she sees. This is true in journalism. I think you could have two people covering a war, two people covering an auto accident. We could have a truck hit a taxi cab outside the studio. 6 people could be watching, and they give 6 different versions of who was at fault or what happened. That's true. But getting back to my prerogative and my opportunity to write about intimacy, why I want to write about my marriage is because I think that in the form of nonfiction that I practiced, call it new journalism, whatever you want to call it, I wanted to write about private life for a long time. And to a degree, I've written some of this private life. What I wanted to do, in essence, is to do what fiction writers do. Fiction writers write about private life. They write about marital affairs. They write about adultery. They write about love and hate. And they write about lives of people that don't exist except in the imagination of the writer. And the writer with creative power, such as the novelist that we both know and respect, many of the big names that write novels, they create characters, they give them names, and you as a reader will say, oh, I know who, I have a sense that that's truth because I have feelings like this character in this novel. Okay, I'm not a novelist. I'm not a fiction writer. I don't fabricate the facts. I try not to even, we know what I am. But what about me penetrating private life or intimate life? It's an ambitious role for a journalist, for a nonfiction writer. And so after I finished Thy Neighbor's Wife that you mentioned before, I also wrote a book about my private family, my own father, mother, And I also wrote a book, as you mentioned, about the private life of the writer. That's what a writer's life is about. Now I want to write about the marriage life of a writer. That's me. The marriage life that I know best is my own, because it's the only one I have. I have kept records for 50 years of my life. I've kept letters, all the letters my wife has written me. Some of them are scolding notes. Some of them are letters of disappointment. Some of them are expressions of outrage about my behavior at various times in our 50 years. I've not only kept and filed these ways like evidence, it's sources of information. And I put it in my big files in my office, this bunker where I work, where there's no phone, where it's isolated. I have these filing cabinets, all like the studio, filing cabinets, all dated 1959, which is the first year we were married, 1960, 1961, files and files and files, to 2009. And when I get a letter, for example, from my wife, who maybe I'm traveling and she writes me a letter in which she expresses her displeasure. And I write next to the letter, which I file, of course, there's always a date. I put it in the file. And I write what prompted her to write that letter. And I put a kind of appendage, an addition. I write a little essay that is like a documentation of a letter. And I give my point of view. And I do that with not only my wife, but all the people I've known during the 50 years of my marriage. So I'm really writing about personal life. I'm giving my point of view now. Now, someone could refute this. I have the facts. Even if you have the facts, sometimes they're open to interpretation, as you know as a journalist yourself. But this is an adventure into nonfiction. It is taking away from the novelist the exclusive right to write about privacy. I think writing about privacy as a journalist is a worthy experiment that I hope will fulfill itself to some degree when I finish the book.
Senhor Talese, e muito já se escreveu também sobre o senhor. Não só entrevistas, reportagens, perfis. O senhor, não como personagem, mas como jornalista, gostou de alguma coisa que se escreveu a seu respeito?
Some of them I hated. But that's part of the free press. But don't think I was happy. The reviews of my books, let's just talk about the books. Some of them have been really negative. I get a lot of bad reviews.
Sobre a sua
Bad
pessoa.
reviews. Sorry?
Sobre a sua pessoa.
Well, yes, about myself, but also what I do. I mean, this book, A Writer's Life, some critic took it apart and said, this is a terrible book. It's a terrible book. When I wrote Thy Neighbor's Wife, it was not only the book was a terrible book, but I was a terrible person for writing the book. When I wrote the book on the New York Times, the journalism book on the history of the New York Times, many bad reviews, including one from the book critic of the New York Times, who ripped it apart. Actually, I thought that no one would read my book because I thought the New York Times has such power, and the book critic has a lot of power. And when he destroyed the book, gave the first review of the book was a negative, totally negative review. I thought, well, that's the end of that book. Well, it wasn't the end of that book, for which I'm happy. But I've had bad reviews. I've had a few good reviews, mostly negative. Not that
Na sua opinião, qual é o veículo que faz o melhor jornalismo no mundo atualmente, que o senhor conheça? Qual é o melhor veículo jornalístico que o senhor conhece hoje em dia?
If you'll forgive my partiality, and maybe forgive my ignorance of other newspapers, I think the New York Times is still, because it's the paper I know best. I speak from ignorance. I don't know what's going on in Paris. I don't know what's going on in London. I don't know what's going on in Brazil, anywhere.
Mas não só jornal, revistas. O senhor acha o New York Times melhor do que a Economist?
Well, the New York Times is not a specialty paper. It is a paper that attempts to cover, maybe it does not succeed to the degree that we wish, but it attempts to cover the economy, culture, foreign affairs. I think it covers foreign affairs better than any paper. The New York Times had men in Afghanistan before the war broke out. It established in Afghanistan a insight into the population by putting people in Afghanistan 4 years ago, even before the Taliban war. They do invest heavily, and though they're not making the money they wish they were, they're doing a good job. I think the New York Times is the best magazine is the New Yorker in the United States. So I have the New York Times, I think, is the best, better than Washington Post, even better than the Wall Street Journal, which is, of course, a specialty paper, though it covers everything as well. I'd say New York Times.
Talese, os internautas querem saber qual foi a impressão que o senhor teve em relação à Flip,
A festa
a
de Paraty.
feira literária em Paraty.
I said I've never been on a program like this before. I think this is a very interesting show. We have nothing like this in New York. or anywhere that I know of. Secondly, the flip experience. I've never been to a literary conference that was as well attended, that it was as well organized, that was as representative of the world, because they had people from all over attending, writers and essayists and editors. And also, I've never been in a place where I saw so many people care about the written word. People had to travel and sit in crowded circumstances. There were so many people who were there, and it was like like we were rock stars. We're just writers, but it was like attending a great conference of a popular culture. And prose writing is not a popular culture. It's more, I thought of it more like of the more educated or literate group. But this organization that put together what we call FLIP were so successful, and the people who attended were so numerous in number and also extraordinary in their enthusiasm for the written word. Here is the time of technology. Everything we're talking about is technology, and Google. These people weren't there for Google. They were there for the written word. And I thought it was amazing. It was very impressive. I was very pleased to go.
Pergunta final, muito curta, resposta, se for possível. Eu sei que ela daria um programa inteiro. Por que é que o senhor escreve?
I think because it's the method by which I can most precisely communicate what I wish to communicate. Talking, as interesting as the show is, I'm not able to, in communication with you and your colleagues in this circular arrangement, I'm giving you a first impression of the words to answer the direct question. But if I had an hour to write the answers to the question you asked, I'd do a better job. So I do a better job when I'm writing, because I'm thinking, and I rewrite. First sentence, I do it second time, third time. I get it more clearly in alliance with what my attitude is. That's why.
Bem, muito obrigado ao senhor Talese. Chegamos ao final do programa. Quero agradecer também a presença dos jornalistas que participaram aqui do Roda Viva e também, evidentemente, a sua atenção e colaboração. Lembrando que as perguntas de telespectadores e internautas que não foram apresentadas durante o programa serão encaminhadas ao nosso convidado. O Roda Viva é apresentado toda segunda-feira ao vivo na internet às 6h30 da tarde e pode ser visto também na íntegra, sem edição ou cortes, às 10h10 da noite. Uma boa noite, uma ótima semana e até mais.